welcome for everyone else joining the Impactful Employee Communications and the Power of Transparency for Employee Morale. We have some wonderful panelists joining us today. Debbie Brown, Greg Aden, and Vickie Lam, thank you all for joining us. And all of the attendees, this is going to be a great, timely, and relevant conversation within the industry. We know that right now, as the landscape of the industry changes and ebbs and flows, that the way we speak and communicate with our guests as well as our employees is more important than ever, as language is what shapes us. You know, it challenges and evolves our perceptions, our relationships, and our cultures. And it's critical now more than ever that we look at having strong, powerful, poignant communication, knowing that as a leader through these ever-changing times, we have to be clear and set expectations, as well as being agile. And sometimes that means on the hour or even within the hour of the same day. We can shape and restore consumer confidence, as well as our teams and employees, our vendors, and our community through the power of our language. And when we are able to lead here by example, we can make a positive impact, not just on the morale of our employees that will permeate to our guests, but it'll also solicit more discretionary energy and effort from our team as we navigate these times together. So we've brought together a great, well-rounded panel to entertain this topic from the leadership perspective, from the property perspective, as well as from the standpoint of human resources. Again, we're excited to have Debbie Brown, Greg Aden, and Vickie Lam join us today and shed some light on the best practices and recommendations they have in communicating more effectively and impactfully with our teams. First, before we delve in, I'm going to address some housekeeping items, and then I will introduce our panelists and we'll dive into the conversation. The chat here is an active role and place for you to be able to communicate with others. It's going to be shared after the fact with those that have attended this. So feel free to, in the chat, share your name, your company, your LinkedIn, contact information as we're addressing various topics of discussion. If you would like to pose any other questions to the panelists, I will moderate those, and we'll use the last bit of the hour to be able to see where there are some common themes and some supporting topics to address the panelists. You can also share other YouTube links, TED Talk links, other relevant information with the community. Great place to actively be able to contribute some other IP and knowledge to the conversation, as well as any other takeaways or thoughts to further the conversation. Following the panel, we will be sending out a post-panel survey, and your feedback is very valuable, not only to the panelists and to be able to get connected with them if you are interested in having a one-on-one dialogue with them, but also in shaping ITRN and how we proceed with these panels going forward. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our three wonderful panelists. We have joining us this morning Debbie Brown. As an accomplished and passionate HR and hospitality leader, Debbie has enjoyed a multi-dimensional career with Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. As the VP of HR for the Americas, she was the HR leader for 50 hotels with over 10,000 employees in the US, Canada, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Widely recognized as the employer of choice, Four Seasons has been on the Fortune Best 100 companies to work for the past 23 years. Combining her HR and hospitality experience, she currently provides consulting services to small and mid-sized private and family-owned businesses, in which hospitable services is a key business deliverable and a company value. Debbie has a results-driven record of solving problems by identifying innovative and pragmatic solutions in the increasingly complex HR arena. We know that to be more true today than ever. She is quick to connect and build trust with a diverse group from the line level to the C-suite. Debbie, in her has been a past member of the University of Denver School of Hospitality Executive Advisory Board, the American Hotel and Lodging Association HR Committee, and the Cornell Institute of Hospitality Labor and Employment Relations, as well as Washington State HR Executive Roundtable. Thank you so much for making some time and joining us here this morning, Debbie. We're excited to hear your perspective. Also joining us this morning, Greg Aden. He is the founder and owner of Aden Leadership. Greg challenges leaders to be their authentic self in all walks of life by giving leaders the skills and strategies to align with purpose and live authentically into the leaders they want to be. Greg works with leaders who are committed to leadership and dedicated to the development of human beings. Beyond leading, he will provide the essential tools to be more productive and perform at levels never recognized before. He guides and leads in a way that builds confidence and ability. Greg will ask you to commit your role as a leader with courage, integrity, and humility by serving others before himself. While working with Aden Leadership, you will be empowered to build relationships that produce exceptional results for your team and your organization. Greg has come from a long background in the hospitality career, working through various property level positions to the corporate level and beyond. He is able to take that experience and further support the industry and its leaders by empowering them with his secrets of how to communicate at the highest level and focus on serving one another rather than selling. Greg, good morning, and thank you for being able to join us. Lastly, we have Vickie Lam, serving as the Vice President of Franchise Performance for the Red Roof Franchising. Vickie is responsible for the retention and service of critical hotels not meeting brand performance in areas of renovation, quality service, and safety and security. Considered storm locations, Vickie collaborates with key stakeholders to determine strategic actions and agreements. With over 15 years in the hospitality industry, she leverages her relationship with both internal support and outside vendors to help ownership move towards healthier financial returns. As a last resort, legal actions or exit strategies are implemented, but not before all options are exhausted. Through her training, sales and marketing support, revenue generation strategies, and vendor finance resources, Vickie has been able to significantly impact the number of ins for retention versus termination. While she regularly faces uphill battles for unrelentless tenacity, personal accountability, and fierce desires to make positive impacts serve her as more as her core motivation. She describes herself as a lifelong learner, having come from the University of Indianapolis and earned 2 bachelor degrees in art therapy and psychology. She also has an MBA. Before diving into the hospitality industry, she served in the Armed Reserves and as the Recreational Service Director with Alzheimer patients. She has earned many industry certifications and brand awards for financial quality and other operational performance. And now with Red Roof's brand conference standards and women conference committees, we're excited to be able to have her join the conversation this morning. Good morning, Debbie, Vickie, and Greg. Thank you for being able to really bring some light to some different perspectives of how we can more impactfully communicate with our employees. We're excited to have you all here.
My pleasure to be here, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Debbie, I'm going to start with you starting at the high level, some theory around this topic before we delve further into some of the brass tacks that our attendees can take away. How would you share to best exhibit the core values and culture, as well as build relationships and collaborate remotely? How are you able to see what looks different but feels the same as we are looking at communication through COVID and how we're able to empower our employees? Can you shed some light on some new and innovative techniques to be able to foster that sort of teamwork and core value culture? Looks like Debbie is having some technical issues. Greg, do you have, oh, looks like she's connecting to some audio right now. While she connects, Greg, do you have some thoughts around ways to be able to foster the core values and communicate those effectively with our teams through these times?
Yeah, I would say this time or last time or next time, the best way to establish a culture is to find out what everybody wants to do, what page they're on, and you know me, Eric, I'm always going to start with leadership. And in these particular times, there's not a better way to find out what people want and what they're willing to do is to ask them. And I know it sounds very simple, but at some moments in time, we've taken the assumption role instead of I really want to find out what our teams and our organizations are capable of. And this goes beyond vision and mission. You mentioned culture, and we aren't a culture without the heartbeat of what our employees are thinking and doing. And I know that's the essence of what we're talking about today, impactful employee communications. And it's, in my opinion, hard to be impactful if we're not truly listening to the people that are making the day-to-day decisions. So that's
how is it that you found that can be a tough conversation to be able to have? Sometimes that's playing all the cards out on the table. Do you dedicate, a meeting just to be able to have that with the executive team and then have them share that with the larger staff, or how do you actually go about entertaining that practice?
Well, we can assign certain meetings that are called honest and impactful employee communications, or we can just be impactful and honest with our employees through all of our communications. And the best organizations that I've seen, Eric, it's just a thread within the organization. It's just the way we show up for one another. So I would say from the bottom up, not top down, from the bottom up, finding out exactly what people are capable of, what they're willing to do, what are they afraid of, what are they excited about, and then that gets reported up to the directors. The directors then report it up to the VPs, because it's the leader that gets to know everything, but he or she has to want to know. And then he or she shows up in a way that they feel what's going on. And another word we're going to talk about later is engagement. There's the way you get this done, Eric, simply is being engaged because you want to, not because you have to. Engagement isn't a buzzword. It's nothing that became in the fad here in the last year or so. It's always been important to understand and know willingly, what everybody's doing. So if you want to put it into a process, sure. Every meeting should start out with honest, impactful communication and conversation. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. But to answer your question, it's either in the organization, Eric, or it's not.
I know one of the things that we do at our agency are clears. We'll clear the air and make sure distractions or anything that's underlying issues are addressed before we start diving into meetings. Vickie, have you found other approaches or methodologies in what you guys are doing at Red Roof that really help to be able to create and foster this culture of transparency and impactful communication? Are there some things that our listeners can be able to do routinely to be able to start moving the needle in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. If you heard Greg, and I love how Greg uses language, the words that he used, people have to want to. And when we talk about bringing the teams together, at Red Roof or any organization, sometimes we think of stakeholders as the owners, the people that own the hotel, or the leaders, the people that are in charge of the hotel. In my belief, too, the stakeholders is every single team member. The stakeholder is certainly their position, their role, the employees that do the job day in and day out. Relationships, as far as gathering a meeting, Greg had mentioned about making sure that we're having that transparent conversation. But there's that sense of need for acknowledgement. I work with some of the toughest hotels that are in the most difficult situations. In order for me to help move the needle or to actually help performance elevate or transition wherever they would like to be. And again, it's their acknowledgement and agreement of what they want to do. I'm here to be that catalyst for them. So along the same line, conversations, interactions, they sometimes they're transactional in passing. It's something that we have to do. But if they're generally more meaningful, then they become intentional conversations. We waste a lot less time, and we also become less frustrated when we don't repeat undesired performance and actually spend quality time investing in whatever the situation would be at hand.
So two themes that I heard here are, about intentional language. And no doubt part of that is, to Greg's point, of making sure that this comes from internally, not external motivation. And that means surrounding yourself with the right team. Given the teams that we have and some of the limited human capital and resources that we have, what are ways to create that rally cry, to create that intention and excitement for that discretionary energy from our team? Debbie, are you able to chime in and share some ways that you found from the HR perspective to be able to do that? Debbie, are you still having some audio issues here? Greg, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah,
You were
absolutely.
kind of the one starting that conversation here. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
You bet. And just putting definition to what HR does. It's human resources. It's not the best performing resources. It's not the lowest level. It's not just leaders. It's human resources. And if we look at the company is only as good as its human resources, then that's a great place to start. And the person who's responsible for developing talent and understanding goals of individuals, humans, then we have the beginning of a wonderful conversation. And Vickie mentioned the word elevate, and I would tell you, in my opinion, leadership is all about elevating others around us. So whether he or she is the vice president or senior vice president before the title human resources, the juice is how that person shows up as a leader in developing other human beings. Developing, leading, serving, guiding, elevating, whatever you want to say. So if that area of our organization is strong and doesn't put up with any shenanigans, and some of it we're seeing on the news, but reinforces everybody has a voice, but everybody has to show up. And that in my opinion, is the crux of this particular topic. Leaders elevating others around them and having a really strong, motivated human resources area that is supportive of growth, absolute human growth.
Vickie, how have you seen that is able to come to life? Other ways to bring this from theory and into execution. Are there some approaches that leaders can be able to take and exercise this muscle, the strategic muscle, more consistently?
So all the leaders that are on the call, the attendees that are on the call, no matter where you started from, it sounds like a big burden. Boy, there's a lot I'm responsible for. And one of the things that's important to remember is the courage to ask for help. You might be in the spotlight of having that responsibility or that title, but to ensure that you're asking for help. And sometimes the best help and the best resources do come from your team members. Sometimes it's the ability to be able to massage the resources that you currently have, because let's face it, we don't have a checkbook. We can write as many zeros as we need to for supplies, for marketing dollars, etc. So being able to collaborate with the team themselves, we've heard the saying of what's in it for me and what's in it for them. In any conversation regarding if it's hiring, or if it's a review on TripAdvisor, an online review, how do you share statistics? How do you share data to make it meaningful for the team to actually define what action steps that can be taken from their side to either generate more revenue or save on the bottom line? So, really mining the resources and knowledge from those that are on the front line or in the field. At the end of the day, when it comes to anything that's defined, if it's owned by the group, or at least the feedback is given or shared with the team members that have the most, and again, I go back to stakeholders, the most at stake, that's when knowledge of doing this will deliver X results, but to be able to generate the feeling of understanding the purpose and the why we do this will generate results, will not only help those results be delivered, but also help those results be sustainable. And if it's sustainable, then ultimately it continues to be attainable. So again, I love language. I've learned listening with Greg and working with other leaders as well. Language does matter in conversations.
It certainly does, and one of the most powerful and effective ways of doing that is by looking at creating transparent conversations. Given that the dynamic of the world, our regional locations, the policies, all of these things are so dynamic right now. We've got to be able to be transparent with how things are evolving and be okay that what we said yesterday or even an hour ago might not be right, and own that. And I think from a leadership standpoint, that is essential to be able to build that trust. Greg, can you share a little bit, what does it mean to be vulnerable and sharing, and how are we able to look at what the implications of integrity and accountability from transparent communications?
Excellent question. So I would like to start out by giving some definition to transparency, and it's really just the act of being transparent. So let's look at transparent. Having thoughts, feelings, or motives that are easily perceived. And if you just think about that for a second, having thoughts, feelings, and motives that are easily perceived, meaning there isn't any hidden agenda, there isn't any hidden emotion. When we're transparent or we're showing up with transparency, it's all out there for the world to see. Now, I would caution anybody to start to think, well, transparency and vulnerability and, dare I say, intimacy in the workplace is perceived as weak. And it's not. It's just the opposite. And if for those of you listening that you haven't heard of or haven't studied or listened to or read Brené Brown, I would highly recommend it. She wrote the book, literally wrote the book on vulnerability. And if you know her, or you've heard about her, you know that she also talks about courage. There's nothing weak about being vulnerable. Now, to answer your question relative to leadership, it's an open, honest, forthright way to show up. And it is with integrity. And integrity has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. But as I grew up in leadership and then became a leadership coach, I've just kind of adopted this meaning for integrity. I am my word, period. Not just say what you mean, but be who you are with your word. And accountability, it's responsible for all, Eric. You're responsible for your thoughts, meaning to be transparent. You're responsible for your words. We've talked about the power of language, and you're certainly responsible for your actions. And here's the trick. Leaders love to hold others accountable, and they will brag about how accountability is a big part of who they are in their leadership style. That's not the difficulty. The difficulty is for leaders and people with the ability to elevate, it's to hold themselves accountable. Because when you show up with leaks in your integrity and your accountability, because you're not wanting to show up transparent, that's when organizations get into trouble.
That is absolutely true, and it's a ever-evolving process. You know, that with just even standard business operations, we can find that our emotions can be able to certainly guide and change that direction. How we feel is going to be able to change the way we present, given that so much of our communication is non-verbally. Can you illuminate a little bit of perspective about how, when we're flustered and when we're caught up with a lot of things as leaders now that are carrying a burden on us, how are we able to perhaps put that aside and be able to still effectively show up and be present for our team and our guests and leave some of that garbage, to the side and not let our feelings get in the way?
Wow, great question. And it's funny. I lead groups through a topic called communicating within our conversations, and won't get into the detail of that 75-minute program. But I would say it starts with empathy. You had mentioned being flustered and the emotions. And we need to recognize, we should want to recognize that some of our conversations are going to be extremely difficult, not just because we're already believing they're going to, but the person we're wanting to have that conversation with, he or she is having a difficult time with their emotions. And a lot of it, Eric, starts with they're unexpressed. There are things we want to say to one another, but we can, but we don't want to. We can, but we don't know how. So again, back to human resources and maybe even a very empathetic leader. And notice I didn't say appeasing or a coddling leader. I said empathetic. So when a leader knows that something's going to be difficult for him or her, imagine what it's like for the person they're getting ready to approach. So how do we make it more comfortable to have these conversations? Well, let's give the person some heads up. Let's set up a time to go over the baseline of what's going on. And you're thinking to yourself, this takes a lot of time. We don't have time for this. We need to get going. We need to produce. We need to have results. Well, we don't have results if we don't have relationships. We don't have relationships if we don't learn how to language or communicate. So I guess the short answer to your question is understand that there's a lot of stuff going on in everybody's mind and heart, and be empathetic. Take a moment to understand where someone else is coming from, which is the meaning of empathy.
Hi, it's Debbie.
Debbie, welcome.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My apologies to my panelists and to the participants. I kept logging in as a participant rather than a panelist, so I could hear you, but I was muted. I'd be happy to jump in, Eric. Maybe you can help me, guide me a little bit on sort of where you'd like me to jump in.
Please, we were just having, the conversation around our emotions and how they affect our language and how we show up. And okay, as leaders, what that looks like to be able to perhaps put that on the sideline and still be able to have the tough conversations that are needed to better the organization. So I'd love your perspective from your experience, just to shed some light on what you found, works and what
Great.
The attendees should be considering as the next time, they're confronted with that situation.
Excellent. Well, let me just say that, and I appreciate what Vickie and Greg have already said. I guess my approach on this has been that I think we're really at a point where, and to Greg's point, I think this is almost a restart on our relationship with employees. So much has changed that I think that our instinct perhaps might be to convey that, let's carry on, pick up where we left off. And we do this because we want to reassure, but I think we really run the risk of being a little bit tone deaf. And I think it's not business as usual. And I think we need to fight this instinct of getting back to normal. It's sort of a new day, and while it may look different, to your earlier point, Eric, it's what we're trying to do is allow it to feel the same. So having those conversations that Greg was just speaking about, I think one of the things that we really need to do is make sure that we've sort of considered the platform by which we're going to start that conversation. And I think one of the things we need to do is really revisit sort of where were we when this pandemic hit, and how strong were our values and culture, particularly in the areas of trust, empowerment, values that are going to really play in today's new world order. I think the other point is going to the employee rather than having the employee come to us. How much emotional toll has that employee endured? What is the trauma to the organization? How many were furloughed? Who was laid off? Are they part of the carpool? Are they beloved, tenured employees, et cetera, et cetera? So I think these are all things we have to really consider as we start to have these conversations that Greg was talking about, is sort of where are they, and sort of going to the employee and rather than having them come to us. And regardless of where the company is on this spectrum, there's no wrong or right. But I think it just helps you sort of determine where it is that you want to restart this conversation. And it is going to be, for some companies, a restart. And for others, it's going to be a much more intentional, maybe transformation, or certainly a much bigger pivot. So that's what I would sort of would say on that. And then just a couple of more thoughts, and I'll hand it back to my panelists. And this may have been already said, so I apologize if it was. I think we're coming back into this employee relationship with a different, really a different dynamic. I think we're going to have to be much more holistic in our approach with our employees. I think we need to be much more connected with them on an emotional, physical, and financial level. I think we're going to have to understand what those pain points are. And to the degree possible, we're going to have to help support that employee. It's a customized approach. Every one of our employees, as Greg said, is going to be impacted differently. They're going to come back to the workforce and be impacted for weeks and months to come. And so the more that we can understand that, the better that conversation that's going to occur can happen. The better, more effective we are in how we communicate. I think nothing's more important than employee health and safety, and I think we have to communicate that at every opportunity that we can. And this is not HR speak, because I think our customers and guests are only going to be as safe as our employees are, or as safe as they perceive to be.
I think you brought up
so I think that's an important thing. Go ahead.
I think you brought up a great point there, and the underlying theme in between what all of you have said in some shape or form is that truly caring and putting our employees and their value, their initiatives first, even ahead of our guests, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have a ripple effect in how they show up, is crucial. The thing that I'm recognizing here is while we're talking a lot of theory and some practical application, it could be, a very different tone if the listeners here just all of a sudden go back and are playing 20 questions and, super lovey and open and wanting to have all these culture conversations that might not have been present before COVID and before listening to this. If they come back and they aren't able to entertain these conversations in the most impactful and effective ways, it could come off as perhaps insecure, perhaps not as a strong leader, perhaps, that something was up and throw off the employees if there isn't some structure and some intention behind this conversation beyond just a true caring for how we look at supporting them. I love, Vickie, your perspective in actually on property. What are ways, and I know we've talked about a few of these and you've addressed application to this, but what are ways that attendees aren't able to go 180 perhaps to the super soft ways of really having this pulse on their company culture? What are means that you've seen effective at being able to perhaps transition into that? Things like submitting tickets or comments to an anonymous email box, or having other methodologies to be able to communicate so that this is instilled in the culture over time instead of something that just happens overnight. Can you share, perhaps some ways that you have seen or the attendees could take back to their own organizations to start moving the needle in that direction?
Absolutely. I was an in-level leader as well, managing, a property. I've managed multiple units at the same time as well. And with that said, no matter if it's 15 employees, 1,000 employees, people like that you're paying attention to the work that they do. That it brings that their work brings a value to the organization. Their work becomes purposeful. They're a human being doing something for a purpose, with a purpose. And they come home to their kids, their family, their four-legged furball baby, whoever it might be, and they feel good. And that employee morale, that level of self-worth goes a long, long way. So when it comes to having those conversations with team members, if you're at in-level and you're managing one property, maybe there's 30 employees. Well, there's 40 plus hours in a work week, per se, but take the time to really manage and schedule 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes if you have to, and make sure that you spend, even if it's 5 minutes, with each team member that look up to you or they're responsible for. If you're overseeing multiple locations, perhaps it's a random phone call that you can do directly to a team member that you've recognized with a positive feedback from a customer, or that you've recognized some elevated change in performance. I also believe asking questions. When people ask questions, thoughtful questions or curious questions, it's not to see them fail and not know the answer. But what it does is it brings up opportunities for conversations. And I believe giving that time, and I guess the message is giving your time to the employees, especially as Debbie had mentioned about maybe working remotely. Some employees that are working from home, they certainly need a lot more of that attention as well. It's not because I want to know what you're doing and I'm not sure if you're accountable for your time. It's more share how you're making use of that time. And again, it keeps people curious. It keeps them engaged in your organization. It builds a culture of trust, involvement. And certainly at the same time, Eric, I really believe that we should promote peer-to-peer conversation opportunities, not, it's 30 minutes for lunch, have a conversation with each other, we're buying pizza, but really structure time so that the team members can actually have carved out time where they can meet together and have conversations with each other and bring up their ideas and solutions. You'd be surprised, at the end of the year, you could have a lot of W-2s with employees that are not working with you anymore, or you can have that set of W-2s where you have one individual who sees everything, shares everything. They're your sales and marketing person. They're your safety and security person. They're your financial guru that will know, hey, I've noticed this. If we just address this, we can save the company a lot of money or make the company a lot of money. At the end of the day, you have someone who generally is invested in that organization. And I believe that's the culture that could be very positive for any organization.
I love what you shared there, whether on property or at home, to take the time to be able to acknowledge the work and contribution that they have. We all want to be part of a winning team. And the only thing I might echo on top of that around impactful employee communications is the more clarity and the more specific you can be about what they've done, the further that goes, instead of saying, hey, you did a great job on that project. Because I really loved the attention to detail and really providing some specifics will reinforce that behavior. So I think it's a great one. Greg, other ideas or thoughts around that you found and would like to contribute to?
Yeah, and I would say to Debbie's point, where we are now compared to where we were, I would just say that continue listening. And I would also say that this new way for some, and the old way, doing it better, is not soft. This is the best way to communicate. it's not about showing more love. It's about showing more intention. We talked about the power of transparency for employee morale. Well, let's define morale: confidence, enthusiasm, and discipline of a person or a group at a particular time. To Vickie's point, make time, schedule time to relate and communicate, and understand where someone's coming from. And I would ask that we listen to our own language. You know, I have a saying: do we say I think, or do we say I believe? What do you believe is true? And when you start speaking your truth instead of I thinking, then people are going to also say, wait a minute, when I speak with Eric or I speak with Debbie, she wants me to come with my truth because she asked truthful questions. And my opinion, my research shows that of all the things that matter most to employees, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be appreciated, and they want to know that their work matters. And oh, by the way, what's my wage? 5, 6, 7 down the list. And someone said this starts at home. Well, think about how you communicate with your spouse and your kids. They want you to see them. They want you to hear them. They want you to know that they're there. And I know it sounds kind of corny, but whether they're 3, 5, 23, or 32, nothing changes. They want you to see them. And I would also ask from something that's easy to put into place is, do your organizations have communication protocol? How do we email? Do we email just to respond, or do we email to start a topic? Why are we sending an email? What's the purpose? What do you want me to do on the to line? What do you want me to know on the CC line? And that in itself, if you don't have a communication protocol, please get one or work with someone that can help you. Same thing with text. Text is not to create culture and process and procedure. It's to let someone know you're running late or you're coming down the hall with coffee. Do they want one? It's casual. Email is where stuff goes, and phone calls should also have a purpose. Why are we calling each other? What do we want to achieve? I believe those two things will help leaders show up more intentional and will help more employees understand where the leader's coming from.
And can I jump in on Greg's point for just a moment, Eric? I think that this is a point in which we've got to really look at how we currently communicate with our employees. And I think I would suggest that there are much more innovative ways and innovative technology that we should be considering as employers to use now that, you know, we have staggered shifts and we've got people working differently. You know, how are we building relationships now with less, you know, social interaction and more social distancing? So how is that working now? And my suggestion is that most of the technology that you used before the pandemic probably needs a refresh. You need chat rooms. You need informal means by which to communicate, because you're not going to have that chat in the hallway as often as you used to. So I think most companies, to all of the points that Vickie and Greg have indicated on sort of the meat of the message, I think you have to think about the logistics of the message, because I think, and ask the employees what's working. I had an interesting conversation with a GM the other day who felt great about the Zoom calls that she was having every day with her senior leaders. But when they reopened the hotel and they were able to see each other in person, you know, she discovered that a couple of those people, it wasn't working for them at all. But she just couldn't read it over Zoom. So I think it's really important to understand that technology it is beneficial, but it also inhibits. And you have to figure out ways, you know, to the point that Greg and Vickie made, you know, we've got to be listening harder than ever. But it's not always as easy to do that over a Zoom call, or as you could see with my technical problems. I mean, that wouldn't have happened if we were having a live meeting. So I think companies ought to be looking at technology as a support for this new world.
I think that's a great transition as we look at the evolution of the times of our brands, of technology, of our cultures. We have to foster a culture of learning, And this is something that I know is near and dear to your heart, Vickie. Can you share a little bit of how you help foster and create that, and what are some methodologies that others can see how they might fit into their organizations?
Thank you very much. I love learning. In the 16 years that I've been with the company, I've held 6 positions, and I've regularly just been curious. And with that said, I believe that if we can invest in our team members and teach them to be curious or guide them how curiosity actually benefits them. I started off with speaking about, what's in it for me to do X, Y, Z. As Greg mentioned, it's not necessarily always a paycheck or a dollar amount after the end. It's actually investing in yourself with that knowledge. The cross-training, at the end of the day, gives them exposure to so many new things and creative channels that they can bring back to your organization. When it comes to learning as well, there's certainly lots of different platforms that are available and resources and that different organizations have. And there's a gentleman named Rohit Bhargava, and he wrote a book called Non-Obvious. And in that book, he talked about connecting random things to make it make sense. So I highly recommend it. He was one of our keynote speakers at one of Red Roofin's conferences. Creating that ultimate learning culture will help organizations thrive so that they are ready to be prepared for the next 6 months, year down the road. Start having conversations today about what you'd like to see happen in 2021 December and setting that preparation. Greg mentioned earlier, and I was listening to him, is when you listen to someone or you're sharing information, at the end of the day, what is it that you want them to take away? Are they just hearing you for noise? Does it sound like it's nagging, or it's just saying, great job? And then what do they do with that information? So at the end of the day, what conclusions? What do they want to take away? Will there be a follow-up conversation to that conversation? And then again, creating meaning and worth around the time. I've grown very selfish with my time. I loved what Debbie said about, and Greg about emails, and Greg saying about, should we send a text? Should we send an email? My time has been extremely precious, and I want to make the use out of it. So as we think and prepare for how we invest in our time spent with our team members, I believe we'll get the biggest payoff at the end.
Greg, it looks like you have some notes, maybe an idea there to follow up.
Well, I can't say enough about being curious. And when you're curious about where someone else is coming from, then you inherently exhibit empathy. And wanting to know where someone else is coming from is extremely valuable during these times, and certainly will be next. And what do you want the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months to look like? I would ask everybody that's anybody in your organization and get them to have that conversation with you. And these are conversations that might not be easy for some, and these are called difficult or courageous conversations. And that's again where, as leaders, we need to show up with efficiency in our word. What is it that we're saying? What is the purpose of the call? Purpose of the meeting? And really helping people communicate during these tough times. And again, I'll just touch on what we mentioned earlier: is be intentional with what it is you'd like to find out from somebody. And I ask the question all the time: what do you want? And if a leader asks that over and over, the first time it might sound a little odd, but if they're showing up in a way that they're going to serve you and they're going to elevate you and they're going to listen to you, then pretty soon it's not soft, it's not weird, it's this person really cares about me. Therefore, I will open up, I will share what's important, what's timely, and what's on purpose. So again, we can't overestimate the importance of us showing up. And then when I say us, as Vickie mentioned, this means owners, managers, leaders, supervisors, whatever title you want to use. Now is the time to show up with some intention and purpose in your voice and your language. And they can see it, they can feel it, and they'll know if it's authentic or not.
Debbie, do you have other thoughts that you'd like to contribute to this?
Yeah, I think just Yeah, just I think that I think sometimes conversations with employees happen sort of organically or spontaneously, and I think they can be some of the most valuable conversations that you have. But I also think there needs to be a strategy around communication, particularly when you're in the midst of a crisis. And so I think all of the organic and the spontaneous conversations are hugely valuable, and certainly the authenticity and all of that. But I think an organization needs to really take sort of a macro approach and sort of, sort of the 30,000 feet all the way down to 5,000, and consider sort of what are the key communication deliverables that the organization needs to share. Company plans, risks, what behaviors we need from employees, how are you feeling, attitude of gratitude, all of it, and then determine sort of who is going to be the carrier, the truth tellers. And attitude of gratitude is something that will run up and down the organization. But I think to have a plan and to have the line level supervisor that is much more likely to have that interactive conversation that Vickie and Greg have been describing. But then the CEO can make a big impact, but it might be a little bit more of a one-way communication. Doesn't have to be, but it often is. So I think taking the time to develop a strategy around communication in a crisis is important, and not sort of relying on simply the old ways of sharing information. I think it really requires an intentional reset.
Eric, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a point about attracting new talent. I know we're speaking about how to improve morale and transparency for the employees or team members that we currently have. But take some time and think about the space you're creating, the first impressions of your organization, your hotel, the first impression of your social media presence, your company website. Does that actually attract great talent? So before you're actually being responsive or responding or being reactive to what's going on, how do you look from an outsider, your organization? I think that's an interesting perspective to have and to explore of how you're showing up right now to future talent.
Vickie, you might or might not have known me do employment branding, so we just became best friends. Because that is huge at being able to share your values and create that visibility, not just for your guests, but for prospective employees. So thank you for sharing that. Greg, one takeaway, final comments that the attendees should be, out of all of this, be taking to heart and going and implementing in their organizations now? Just one final thought, and then we'll pass it to Debbie and wrap up.
Yeah, I would just ask you to read the title of this panel and pick out the words that you really want to focus on. And I ask you, I believe it's important for you to focus on your impact, owning your impact, being transparent, and understanding what employee morale really means, not only today, but tomorrow.
Thank you.
And
Debbie, final thoughts?
Yeah, just I think that today's world is requiring us as leaders to have a remarkable amount of agility and innovative thinking. And what may be the absolute truth today might not be tomorrow. And so all of us who like to think of ourselves as experts and having the answers, I think we have to show humility in a time like this, and even vulnerability. And what we need to say to our employees is, based on all the information that we have today, this is where we're at. This is sort of, but please bear with us. And all that we can say is that we're going to do our best, and that your health and safety is at the top of our list. And so I think showing sort of that humility is important in a time like this for our leaders.
This is certainly a very dense conversation. A lot has been covered here, and I think each of these little topics and questions that we've entertained could be their own panel. And so for the listeners, I invite you, if there is some substance here you would like more information on, if you would like to be able to connect with these leaders in the industry individually, to reach out, to use your own language and be impactful in working on this strategic muscle. We're never quite going to be able to get it 100% right, but we can always work and evolve and iterate on becoming better, more powerful communicators. And so my encouragement is to not only practice this routinely, but also seek the leadership and the expertise that you need to be able to refine that skill set. Thank you all for joining us. International Tourism Resource Network is having this weekly Wheels Up Wednesday conversation and panel. Our next topic, next Wednesday, the 29th of July, will be around alternative revenue sources for short-term profits. Certainly the industry right now is curtailed with low occupancy rates and limited seating in our restaurants, and there are other innovative and unique ways to be able to explore how do we create some short-term revenues to help support the organization. We've got some great leaders there, and my encouragement is to be able to go to the internationaltourismresourcenetwork.com, sign up and register for that, get involved in some of our other think tanks and events that we have going on, and be part of this larger solution to be able to support the industry, as we have seen Debbie, Greg, and Vickie do here. Thank you all for your time. Thank you guys for joining. It's been a great conversation, and we appreciate your contribution to the industry here.
Can be able to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more information and get involved in the community and share your own voice and perspective.